It was a bright and sunny day in the ancient forest. The birds and insects chattered a lovely tune as aptonoths, great hulking herbivores, drank from the clear streams. The jungle today seemed peaceful and quiet. Katrine was a novice monster hunter, fresh off the boat in fact. After their rocky boat ride to the New World, she was more than eager to see what good she could do. She had practically fallen over herself to get to the hunting board when they had arrived. She blushed as she thought about it, her pale face giving a hint of pink under her freckled cheeks. Still, she had been eager. The board she read had several tasks meant for the arriving hunters, but one stood out to her among the rest. It read, "Great Jaguar spotted." She had grabbed the paper and accepted the task immediately. She had no clue what a great jaguar was, but she didn't care. Katrine meant to make a name for herself in the New World, and this seemed to be the best way to do it. If she killed something called great, she figured that would mean others would think her great too. So here she was, her dual blades at her side, stepping along the wet floor of the jungle. So far she had already seen several creatures she did not recognize. She saw massive fish with hardened backsides, pig creatures with moss-covered backs, and strange birds with large beaks. All these creatures took her aback, but so far, she had not seen anything that looked like a threat. "Did I go the wrong way?" she asked as she pushed through a bit of underbrush. She tried to think back where she may have strayed off course, recalling that, about an hour before, she had come across some markings on the ground that looked like something being dragged across the ground. "Did I go the wrong way there?" she asked herself. Just then came a loud growl from somewhere up ahead. Katrine's heart quickened as she stepped into the brush and listened for the noise. A second later, another low rumble of a growl reverberated across the forest floor. "Is that my target?" she asked herself, as she tried to lean from the bush to see more of the source of the noise. It was no good. Whatever the beast was, it currently lay on the opposite side of a ridge up ahead. Taking a moment to steel her nerves, she pushed her short red hair from her face and crept forward. Katrine moved at a slow pace, her every footstep deliberate and thought out. She was now, more than she had ever been before, hyper-aware of the noises she made. When her foot slipped and cracked a twig, she nearly jumped out of her skin. She stopped then, and waited. Did it hear that? She asked herself. When there was no sign that she had been noticed, Katrine crept on. She did not stop again until she reached the crest of the ridge. There, she lay on the ground and proceeded to move to the lip of the rocky cliff on her belly. The grassy jungle floor felt wet on her exposed stomach, sending a tingle down the edge of her spine. Once there, she peered down and found she was overlooking a shallow pool of water, about 15 feet below. However, there was no great beast in sight. Katrine sighed a mixture of relief and frustration. It had been hours now, and still she had not even seen what a great jaguar even looked like. At the same time, she did not feel so certain she wanted to know. The more she thought about it, the more the thing became terrifying. Why didn't I just take a lesser contract like everyone else? She asked aloud and stood to her feet, brushing herself off and adjusting her leather chest piece across her small chest. The wetness of the jungle floor had soaked through, and she could feel the dampness on her breast and thighs. "Just great," she said. "Well, maybe it left some tracks down there." Taking a few steps back, she darted forward and leapt down into the pool. Landing on her feet, she felt the cool water splash up, but this had been her mistake. Before she could react, she caught a glimpse of a great hair-covered shape rushing towards her. Her mind raced with a dozen ways to escape, but in that split second she froze, too afraid to make a quick decision. The beast did not hesitate. Katrine could not make out what had attacked her, but she found herself inside its gaping maw, the wet saliva coating her body as its massive tongue rubbed against her torso. The feeling was hot and rough, as the tongue worked its way around her body and then to her face. In that moment she tried to kick out, only to realize she was kicking at open air. Her buttocks and leg were hanging freely from the beast's mouth. "Help!" she screamed from inside, even as the warm tongue rubbed her face and coated her in its sticky saliva. "Help!" she screamed on. Her attacker then moved, or at least it felt so from the wind hitting her calves. As it did, it opened its mouth and attempted to swallow the rest of her, but Katrine was ready. Pushing back against the creature's jaw, she managed to free herself from its mouth. She fell down onto her backside into the water. She felt her clothes soak all the way through. This was the least of her worries, though, as she scrambled backwards on her hands and feet. "Help me," she screamed. The thought of fighting whatever this was had left her now. It was a massive four-legged lizard creature with a mane much like a lion's. It had yellow reptilian eyes and green scales along its sides, while its underbelly was a bright blue. Most terrifying to her now was the massive unhinged jaw and throat stack. She continued backpedaling on her hands and feet until she managed to get the nerve to stand up. The jaguaress, meanwhile, stood there watching her, its eyes following her every move. Katrine tried to dodge this time, but it was too fast. As she attempted to leap to the side, she found her legs caught in its mouth. She was dragged on her belly through the wet pool until it had finished its charge. "Help!" she cried again, through gasps of air as the water rushed across her face. The jaguar stopped and, using its powerful jaws, pulled Katrine's leg into its mouth. She felt her heart race with fear as she kicked desperately at the thing's face. The jaguaress, meanwhile, licked along the captured legs with its tongue. As she kicked with futility, she could not help but to get chills as its warm tongue ran along her thigh. "Am I going to die?" she thought while kicking the beast with all her might. Her kicks did not seem to faze the monster in the slightest. After taking a moment to savour her leg, the jaguaress opened its mouth just as Katrine came in with another kick. To the girl's horror, her other leg entered its maw as it closed its jaws once more. "No!" she screamed, as she felt her body shift in the water as it pulled her legs in up to her ass. "No, please!" she pleaded to the beast. The monster stopped again, its unintelligent eyes watching as she flailed about. Inside its mouth, its tongue moved along her two legs, feeling them up and coating her in its thick saliva. Katrine then felt her left boot fall away, and she cried out as the monster went to work, licking her small toes. "Please," she pleaded again. But the monster was showing no mercy. It tilted its head back and, using its tongue, pulled Katrine in up to her stomach. She cried out as its mouth closed around her belly, its jagged teeth seeming more interested in holding her there than chewing her in two. More of her submerged into its maw meant more for the beast to taste. It licked along the girl's butt before slowly snaking its tongue between her legs. Katrine cried out as she felt the beast's form press against her crotch. "No!" The jaguaress continued to lick along her crotch. As it did, she felt her shorts begin to shift on her as the tip of its tongue reached the inside of her leg. She could do nothing but pant in fear and slight arousal as it toyed with her inner thigh and snaked its way towards her privates. It only occurred then to Katrine that she still wore her slinger on her arm. Reaching down into the waters, she felt around until grabbing on a sizable stone. Once she had one, she loaded it into the slinger and pulled it back into place. "Let go of me," she cried as she launched the rock directly into the jaguaress's eye. The creature cried out in pain then, but to her dismay did not release her. Instead, it reared its head back and opened its maw up. With nothing to hold on to, she slid down into its awaiting mouth, her entire body submerged. In a last-ditch effort to save herself, Katrine grabbed onto its teeth and held on for dear life. The jaguaress lowered its head once again, and the tongue started in, exploring first her flat stomach. She cried out then as the wet tongue glided along her belly. "Please," she begged from within the creature's mouth. She was wet and sticky, but none of that mattered to her now. There looked to be no escape from this. As the tongue worked its way up to her chest, she cursed her own stupidity. The creature's tongue worked its way over her breast, then, licking along her jerkin. In the dark, Katrine felt as the tongue